Good evening, friends. Imagine this. It's the dead of night in a remote Alaskan military outpost where the wind howls like a wounded animal across frozen tundras, and the aurora borealis paints the sky in eerie greens and purples. A young soldier, fresh from basic, lies in his bunk in an old barracks building. Block 47, they call it, trying to shake off the chill that seeps through the walls. He's alone in the room, or so he thinks. Then, from the shadows, a whisper slithers into his ear. "They broke us. Why won't you break?" He bolts upright, heart pounding, scanning the empty bunks. No one there. But the voice lingers, cold as the permafrost outside. This isn't just a ghost story spun from campfire tales. It's rooted in the shadowy underbelly of the Cold War, a time when superpowers pushed the boundaries of science, psychology, and perhaps even the supernatural to gain an edge. We're talking 1962, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world teetered on the brink of nuclear annihilation. The United States, desperate to outmaneuver the Soviets, greenlit experimental programs that blurred the lines between military strategy and madness. One such operation, codenamed Fracture, was conducted at Fort Greely, Alaska, a sprawling army base established in the 1940s for Arctic warfare training and missile defense. Nestled in the Yukon-Tanana uplands, about 100 miles southeast of Fairbanks, Fort Greely was isolated, unforgiving, and perfect for secrets. Real facts back this up. Declassified documents from the era reveal Project MKUltra, the CIA's mind control experiments involving LSD and hypnosis on unwitting subjects, including soldiers. But Operation Fracture, it's whispered in veteran circles as something darker. Rumours of psychic warfare, attempts to fracture the human psyche to create unbreakable interrogators, or even summon otherworldly forces for espionage. Tonight, we dive into testimonies from modern soldiers stationed at Fort Greely in the 2000s, who claim the ghosts of those 1962 experiments still haunt the barracks. These aren't wide-eyed recruits spinning yarns. They're hardened operators from units like the 11th Airborne Division, men and women who've faced real combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. Yet something in those old concrete walls unravels them. Is it collective PTSD, Arctic isolation syndrome, or remnants of a mission that tore open a rift we can't close? As we explore these accounts, ask yourself, what happens when the military plays God with the human mind? And what lingers when the experiment fails? Stick around. The truth might just fracture your own perceptions. Chapter 1. The Call to the North. My name is Sergeant First Class Elias Thorne, 11th Airborne Division. 8 years in, 3 combat deployments. 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. I've jumped out of perfectly good airplanes into places where people were actively trying to kill me. I've seen friends die. I've killed in return. I thought I knew what fear felt like. Then I got orders for Fort Greely, Alaska. It was February 2022. My platoon sergeant slid the paperwork across the desk like it was just another rotation. "Thorne, you're going north. Missile defense detail. 6 months, maybe 8. Pack warm." I laughed. After the sandbox, a cold weather gig sounded like a vacation. No dust storms, no ambushes, just snow and radar screens. I figured I'd spend my days running PT in sub-zero temps, my nights playing cards in the barracks, and come home with frostbite stories to tell at the VFW. The flight into Fairbanks was rough. The C-130 bucked through turbulence like it was riding a bull. From there, it was a 2-hour convoy through whiteout conditions to Greeley. The base itself is massive. Over 600,000 acres of taiga, tundra, and jagged mountains. In summer, the sun barely sets. In winter, the dark lasts 20 hours a day. The wind never stops. It howls through the pines and rattles the chain-link fences around the missile silos like it's trying to get inside. They assigned me to Block 47, one of the oldest barracks on post. Built in the late 1950s, concrete walls 3 feet thick, narrow slit windows that let in almost no light. The place smelled like old gym socks and mildew no matter how much they bleached the floors. My roommate was Private First Class Miguel Ramirez, a skinny kid from El Paso on his first real assignment. He met me at the door with a nervous grin. "Welcome to the deep freeze, Sergeant. You ever seen -60? We carried my duffel inside. 4 bunks, 2 occupied. Mine was the bottom one nearest the window. Ramirez had the top across from me. The other 2 bunks were stripped bare, sheets folded razor-sharp at the foot, like someone had left in a hurry and never come back. "Those used to belong to guys who PCS'd early," Ramirez said, dropping his voice. "Or so they say." I unpacked my gear, rifle in the locker, boots under the bunk, dog tags clinking against my chest. Lights out at 2200. I lay there listening to the base generator thrum outside, the occasional distant howl of wolves. The cold seeped through the walls like it was alive. Around 2:30, I woke to a sound I couldn't place at first. Slow, deliberate scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood, coming from the bunk directly above mine. I froze, breath fogging in the beam of my red lens flashlight. "Ramirez?" I whispered. No answer. He was dead asleep, snoring softly. The scratching stopped, then started again. Slower, more intentional. I sat up, heart rate climbing the way it does before contact. I swept the beam across the empty mattress above me. Nothing. Just dust, and a faint stain on the springs that looked almost like old blood. I told myself it was the building settling, pipes contracting in the cold. I lay back down, eyes open, waiting. The scratching returned, then faded into something worse. A low murmur, like someone talking through a thick wall. Words I couldn't quite make out. I strained to listen. The voice, if that's what it was, sounded tired, resigned. "Join the fracture." I sat bolt upright again. The room was empty. Ramirez hadn't moved. I checked the door, locked, windows sealed. No one could have gotten in or out. Morning came too soon. PT formation at 0500, running laps in the dark with headlamps while the wind tried to knock us over. At chow, I mentioned the noise to Ramirez. He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're hearing things already, Sarge. Give it a week. This place messes with everybody." I pressed him. "What do you mean?" He glanced around the DFAC, lowered his voice. "Old-timers talk about Block 47. Back in the 60s, they ran some classified program here. PSYOPs stuff, mind games. Guys went in normal, came out different. Some never came out at all. They sealed off parts of the basement after 62. Said it was structural damage. But people still hear things. Voices, footsteps, stuff moving when no one's there." I rolled my eyes. "Ghost stories. Every base has 'em." "Maybe," he said, poking at his eggs. "But I've heard the scratching too. And sometimes names. Like someone's calling roll for people who aren't here anymore." That night I couldn't sleep. The scratching came back at 0200 on the dot. Louder, more insistent. Then the murmurs returned, clearer this time. Multiple voices overlapping, like a radio stuck between stations. They tested us. Broke the veil. Now we test you. I grabbed my multi-tool, stood on my bunk, and pried open the air vent above me. Dust poured out. Inside, scratched into the metal ductwork, were dates. March 1962. And names: Harlan, Whitaker, Daniels. Next to them, a crude symbol that looked like a broken circle with lines radiating outward. I stared at it for a long time. Ramirez woke up, saw me standing there with the vent cover in my hand. "What the hell, Sarge?" I didn't answer. I just kept staring at the scratches. Because one of the names, Harlan, was followed by a single word carved deeper than the rest. Fractured. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Wire. The second week at Fort Greely felt like the first week stretched thin and sharpened on both ends. The days blurred into endless cycles of PT, perimeter patrols, and maintenance on the ground-based mid-course defense silos, those towering white sentinels that stood like frozen giants against the endless white horizon. By 600 every morning we were out in the dark, breath freezing on our balaclavas, running loops around the fenced compounds while the aurora borealis flickered overhead like a malfunctioning radar screen. The cold wasn't just weather, it was a presence. It pressed against your skin, crawled into your bones, and made every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. Nights were worse. After lights out in Block 47, the barracks settled into a kind of uneasy silence, broken only by the low drone of the base generator and the occasional metallic groan of contracting steel. I tried to convince myself the scratching from the first week had been a one-off, a combination of exhaustion, an altitude adjustment, and imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Soldiers don't survive combat by lying to themselves. On the 8th night, I woke at 0147 exactly, as if my body had been waiting for the clock to hit that mark. The scratching was back, but different this time, slower, more deliberate, like someone was carving letters into the underside of the top bunk with a dull knife. I lay perfectly still, eyes locked on the slats above me, listening. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Then silence. I reached for my red lens flashlight and clicked it on low. The beam caught motes of dust drifting lazily in the frigid air. Nothing else. I exhaled, fogging the lens, and was about to turn it off when the murmurs started. They weren't coming from the bunk above me anymore. They were coming from the air vent. A soft, staticky hiss, like an old shortwave radio trying to tune in a distant station. Words formed slowly, fragmented at first, then clearer. They promised us strength. Broke the veil instead. Now the fracture listens. I sat up so fast I cracked my head on the metal frame. Ramirez stirred but didn't wake. I swung my legs over the side, bare feet hitting the ice-cold concrete, and moved to the vent. It was a rectangular grill about 18 inches wide, screwed into the wall at head height. I pressed my ear against it. The voices sharpened. Harlan was the first. He saw them clearly. They're still here. My pulse hammered in my throat. I grabbed my multi-tool from the locker, unscrewed the grill as quietly as I could, and pulled it free. A puff of stale, metallic air washed over my face, air that smelled faintly of ozone and something older. Shit like wet stone and decay. Inside the duct, the flashlight beam revealed more scratches. Dates, initials, and that same broken circle symbol repeated over and over like a mantra. But what stopped my heart was the fresh carving, still bright and silver where the metal had been freshly scored. "Thorn, you hear us now." I stumbled back, the grill clattering to the floor. Ramirez bolted upright. "Sarge, what the hell?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the vent. He climbed down, peered inside, and went pale. "Jesus, that wasn't there yesterday." We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Instead, we sat on the edge of my bunk, flashlights trained on the open duct like it was a live grenade. Around 0330, the whispers returned, louder, layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. "Oh, you can't ignore the fracture. It widens every time you listen." "Calm down, see for yourself," Ramirez whispered. "They're talking to us, Sarge. Not at us. To us." I nodded, throat dry. "They know my name." The next morning, I reported the vent to the platoon sergeant during formation. Master Sergeant Caldwell listened with the patient boredom of a man who'd heard every barracks ghost story twice. "Vandals," he grunted. "Kids from the motor pool screwing around. I'll have maintenance weld it shut." I pushed. "There are names in there from 1962. Harlan, Whitaker, and my name, Sergeant. Freshly carved." He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Thorn, you're a good NCO, but this place does things to people. Arctic hysteria. Look it up. Guys start hearing things, seeing shadows. Happens every winter." "Oh, who want a psych referral?" "No, Sergeant." "Then drop it. Focus on the mission." I dropped it for about 12 hours. That evening, Ramirez and I pulled guard duty at Observation Post 3, a small heated shack overlooking the old Nike Hercules test range, a relic from the early Cold War days, now just crumbling concrete pads and rusted chain-link fences sagging under snow. The sign on the gate still read, "Restricted Area, Project Fracture. Personnel only. Authorized personnel only." Ramirez pointed at it as we settled in with thermoses of coffee. "You ever wonder what they were really doing out here?" I shrugged. "MK Ultra stuff. Mind control. Interrogation resistance." He shook his head. "More than that. My uncle was stationed here in '89. He said the old-timers talked about fracture like it was black magic. They weren't just trying to break soldiers' minds. They were trying to open them to something else. Remote viewing, ESP, maybe even contact." "Contact with what?" He looked out at the dark tundra. "Whatever lives on the other side of the veil." We sat in silence after that. Around 2200, the aurora flared bright green, casting shifting shadows across the snow. Then the radio in the shack crackled to life. No one had keyed it. "Fracture Team Alpha, status report." A pause. Static. "Subjects resisting veil thinning." Another pause. "They're coming through." The transmission cut off. Ramirez and I stared at each other. I keyed the mic. "OP3 to base comms. Did you just broadcast?" "Negative. All quiet on our end." We shut the radio off. But 10 minutes later, it came back on its own. Same frequency, same distorted voices. Thorn. Ramirez. You're next." We didn't speak the rest of the shift. When relief arrived at 0200, we practically ran back to Block 47. Inside the barracks, the vent was still open. Maintenance hadn't touched it. And on the wall beside it, someone, or something, had added one more line in fresh scratches. "Come downstairs. We didn't sleep that night either. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. By the end of the second month, Block 47 had stopped feeling like a barracks and started feeling like a trap. The cold had settled into everything. Our gear, our lungs, our thoughts. Patrols around the missile fields became rote. Check the perimeter sensors, scan the radar scopes for phantom contacts, log the endless white nothing. But the nights in Block 47 grew heavier. Lights flickered without reason. Doors creaked open on their own. And the whispers, those damn whispers, had learned our names. Specialist Lena Kowalski was the first to break the silence about it. She was our platoon's senior comms specialist. Former ranger, tough as nails, with a scar across her left cheek from an IED in Helmand province that should have ended her career. She pulled me aside after morning formation one day, breath fogging between us in the -38-degree air. "Thorn," she said, voice low. "You're hearing them too, aren't you?" I didn't bother lying. "Every night they know my name, yours?" She nodded once. "They call me Lena, and they keep saying the same thing. Remember Harlan?" "Who the hell is Harlan?" We both knew the answer already, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. That afternoon, during a rare break in the storm, we slipped into the base library. Really just a converted Quonset hut with outdated terminals and a few shelves of declassified manuals. We logged into the secure network and started digging. Fort Greely's history was no secret. Established in 1942 for Arctic warfare training, expanded in the 1950s for Nike missile defense, then repurposed again in the early 1960s when the Cold War turned psychological. Operation Fracture appeared in only the thinnest of footnotes, classified under DARPA's Psychological Resilience Enhancement Program. The official line was simple: stress inoculation training, sensory deprivation, controlled hallucinogens to simulate enemy interrogation. But the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. A scanned 1963 after-action report, partially redacted, described Protocol 7 trials conducted in Block 47's sub-basement. Subjects were placed in padded isolation chambers for up to 72 hours, exposed to subsonic frequencies, LSD derivatives, and something the report called amplified parapsychological stimuli. The goal? Induce controlled out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, or telepathic intercepts. One entry read, "Subject Harlan, Private James R., exhibited acute auditory and visual hallucinations after 48 hours. Reported entities observing from beyond the veil. Subject became non-responsive after 62 hours. Transferred to Walter Reed for psychiatric evaluation. Status: fractured." Kowalski read it aloud, voice flat. They weren't just breaking minds. They were trying to open doors. I scrolled further. Another document, heavily blacked out. I mentioned non-human intelligences and unintended breaches. The program was terminated abruptly in late 1962 after multiple subjects suffered permanent psychological collapse. Official cause of death for 3 soldiers: hypothermia during a training accident. Unofficial rumors: they never left the basement. We printed what we could, grainy photocopies of faded memos, and hid them in our lockers. That night the blizzard hit hard. Winds over 60 knots. Visibility 0, all non-essential movement restricted. The barracks felt like a submarine under pressure. Around 2,300 the power flickered. Once, twice, then dimmed to a sickly yellow glow from the emergency lights. The generator outside struggled, then steadied. Then the footsteps started. Heavy, deliberate bootfalls echoing down the empty hallway outside our room. Not one person. A squad, and marching in perfect step. Kowalski and I were out of our bunks in seconds, sidearms drawn, flashlights on. We cleared the hallway room by room. Nothing, just empty bunks and the wind howling through the vents. We reached the last set of quarters at the far end of the block, rooms that had been sealed off since the 1970s with yellow hazard tape and padlocked doors. The tape had been cut. The padlock hung open. We looked at each other. No words. We pushed the door open. The room smelled of dust and old paper. Flashlight beams swept across stripped bunks, rusted lockers, and a single metal footlocker shoved against the far wall. On top of it lay a faded Polaroid photograph, edges curled yellow. We approached slowly. The photo showed 5 soldiers in 1960s fatigues, standing in a line outside Block 47. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken, expressions hollow, like men who had seen something they couldn't unsee. On the back, in faded blue ink, Fracture Team Alpha, March 1962. We broke the barrier. As we stared at the image, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. Not a trick of the light, not a silhouette. A shape, humanoid, elongated, edges blurring like smoke. It moved without sound, drifting toward us. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. Then it spoke. Not out loud, inside our heads. "You see us now," it whispered, voice layered with a dozen others. "You hear the fracture. Join the broken." Kowalski raised her M9. "Back off." The shadow paused, then rippled like water. "We are already inside." I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. The shadow recoiled, then vanished, melted into the wall like ink into paper. We backed out fast, slamming the door behind us. The hallway lights surged back to full brightness. The wind outside howled louder, as if laughing. We never spoke about that night to anyone else, but the photo stayed with me. I kept it hidden in my locker, tucked inside the folded printouts. Chapter 4. The Basement Descent. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in the military. It gets people killed, or worse, it gets them changed. After the shadow in the sealed room and that Polaroid with our names scratched on the back, Kowalski, Ramirez, and I couldn't walk away. We needed answers. We needed to see what they had buried down there. The next day we fabricated a maintenance request. Intermittent electrical faults in Block 47's lower level. Master Sergeant Caldwell signed off without much scrutiny. He was more concerned with the upcoming missile test than a couple of flickering lights in an old barracks. "Don't make a mess," he grunted, "and don't get lost. That basement's been off-limits since the 70s. For a reason." We waited until 2200 hours, when most of the block was asleep or pulling night shifts elsewhere. Kowalski had borrowed a set of master keys from the motor pool. Ramirez carried a small toolkit, bolt cutters, and 3 high-lumen flashlights. I had my M4 slung low across my chest, unloaded but comforting all the same, and the Polaroid tucked inside my parka. The stairwell door to the basement was heavy steel, painted institutional green and marked with faded red letters. Authorized personnel only. Level B3. Project Fracture. Access restricted. The padlock was rusted but still intact. Ramirez cut it with the bolt cutters. The chain clattered to the concrete steps like a gunshot in the silence. We descended slowly. The air grew colder with every step. Thicker, stale, carrying the faint metallic tang of old blood and ozone. Flashlight beams danced across graffiti-scarred walls, dates from the 60s, crude drawings of broken circles, names we recognized from the vents. Harlan, Whitaker, Daniels. At the bottom, the corridor stretched out like a tunnel into hell. Concrete walls, exposed pipes dripping condensation, and a row of heavy doors on either side. Most were locked. One stood slightly ajar. We pushed it open. The room beyond was larger than I expected. An abandoned laboratory. Dusty workbenches lined the walls, covered in abandoned equipment. Oscilloscopes with cracked screens. Our reel-to-reel tape recorders, banks of vacuum tubes still wired together. In the center stood 3 isolation chambers, padded cells with thick observation windows, restraint straps dangling from the ceilings like dead vines. Wires snaked across the floor, some still connected to ancient control panels. A faded sign above the door read, Protocol 7, Sensory Deprivation and Stimulus Application, Level 4. Clearance required. Ramirez let out a low whistle. This is straight out of a horror movie. Kowalski moved to one of the workbenches and picked up a yellowed logbook. She flipped through it under her flashlight. Listen to this. March 15th, 1962. Subject Harlan exposed to Protocol 7 for 62 hours. Auditory hallucinations reported after 36 hours. Subject claims to hear voices from beyond the barrier. Have visual manifestations at 58 hours. Entities described as elongated shadows with no faces. Subject became catatonic at 62 hours. Removed to medical bay. Status: fractured. She turned the page. They weren't just testing minds. They were trying to contact something. Entries mention amplified parapsychological stimuli, subsonic tones combined with hallucinogens, and something they called resonance devices. They thought they could punch through to another dimension for intelligence gathering. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They opened a door they couldn't close. We moved deeper. At the far end of the lab was a larger chamber, double doors, reinforced steel. The sign above it had been partially scratched out, but we could still read Fracture Chamber, Final Protocol. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the room was circular, walls lined with copper mesh. Faraday shielding, maybe. In the center stood a raised platform with a single metal chair bolted to the floor. Restraints at the wrists, ankles, and neck. Above it hung a cluster of strange devices, large coils, speakers, and what looked like an early prototype of a helmet wired with dozens of electrodes. The floor around the chair was stained dark, old blood maybe, or something worse. That's when we heard it, a low organic hum, not mechanical, not electrical. It vibrated in our chests, in our teeth. The lights we'd rigged on extension cords flickered. Shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, stretch. Ramirez whispered, "Sarge, look." On the wall opposite the chair, someone had scratched hundreds of tiny words, overlapping. Frantic. They see us. They are hungry. The fracture is wide. Join us. Then the hum became voices, layered, overlapping, speaking directly into our minds. They promised us power. Broke the veil instead. Now the fracture feeds. Kowalski raised her flashlight. The beam caught something in the center of the room. A shimmer in the air, like heat rising off asphalt, but colder. A tear, a rift. Barely visible, but there, pulsing faintly, edges frayed like torn fabric. The shadows moved. They peeled away from the walls, tall, elongated figures without faces, limbs too long, movements too fluid. They drifted toward us, silent, inevitable. "Run!" I shouted. We backed towards the door. Ramirez tripped over a cable, flashlight clattering. The shadows surged. Cold hands, insubstantial yet real, grabbed at our ankles, our wrists. The voices flooded our heads. "Break with us! Become the fracture!" I fired my M4 into the ceiling. 3 controlled bursts. The muzzle flash lit the room like lightning. The shadows recoiled, shrieking inside our skulls. The rift pulsed violently, then dimmed. We scrambled out, slamming the double doors behind us. The hum faded, but the cold lingered in our bones. We didn't speak on the way back up the stairs. When we reached the main level, the barracks was quiet. Normal, as if nothing had happened. But we knew better. We had seen the fracture. And it had seen us. Chapter 5. Fractured Alliances. The basement changed everything. After we stumbled back up those stairs, none of us were the same. Ramirez started shaking the moment we hit the main level. Violent tremors that had nothing to do with the cold. He sat on the edge of his bunk, or staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "They were inside my head, Sarge," he whispered. "They showed me things. Old Soviet codes from '62. Numbers, coordinates, but twisted, like they were laughing while they gave them to me." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and told him to get some rest. But rest didn't come for any of us. Kowalski fared no better. She'd always been the steady one, the ranger who never flinched under fire. But now she kept glancing at corners, at shadows that weren't there. During morning PT, she lagged behind, eyes unfocused. When I asked if she was okay, she just muttered, "They're still talking. Not loud, just constant." We couldn't report it. Not officially. If we went to the chain of command with stories of shadow entities and voices from another dimension, and we'd be on the next medevac flight out with psych evals stamped unfit for duty. So we kept it between us. But the fracture was spreading. Ramirez started muttering to himself during patrols, little phrases in broken Russian he'd never learned. "Oni smotriat, oni golodny." They watch. They're hungry. He'd catch himself mid-sentence, shake his head, and go quiet. The platoon noticed. Guys started giving him space, whispering that the Arctic was getting to him. Kowalski requested a psych appointment through the battalion surgeon. The doc listened to her describe the whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched, then scribbled a note. Probable group delusion, secondary to prolonged isolation and environmental stressors. He prescribed sleep aids and told her to take it easy. No referral to Fairbanks, no real help. That's when I went to Lieutenant Hayes. Hayes was our platoon leader. West Point, 2 tours in Iraq, family lineage going back to the Gulf War. He'd heard the rumors about Block 47 long before we arrived. I asked for a private meeting in his office after duty hours. He closed the door, poured 2 mugs of coffee, and listened without interrupting while I told him everything. The scratching, the vents, the Polaroid, the basement, the rift, the shadows. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. "My grandfather was stationed here in '63, he said finally. He never talked about it much, but once, after too many beers, he told me fracture wasn't shut down because it failed. It was shut down because it worked too well. They cracked open something they couldn't control. Half the test subjects ended up in psych wards. The other half disappeared. Official records say training accidents, hypothermia. But my grandfather said they never found the bodies. He met my eyes. I've heard the legends, Thorn. Every CO who's been through here has. Most write it off as ghost stories. I never did. He stood, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were printouts, declassified fragments, blacked out memos, and a single photograph of a young soldier in 1960s fatigues. The caption read, Private James R. Harlan, last known image before transfer. He was my grandfather's bunkmate, Hayes said. Never came back from the basement. He slid the box across the desk. I'm authorizing a discreet investigation. Night vision cameras, EMF detectors, audio recorders. Everything from supply, you, Kowalski, and Ramirez run it. Document everything. If this is real, if there's still something active down there, we take it to battalion command with evidence. If it's just stress, we get you help quietly. We set up that night. Cameras in the hallways, the common area, our room, and, after cutting the lock again, the stairwell to the basement. EMF detectors on tripods. Digital recorders running 24/7. We took shifts watching the feeds from the common room. At 100, the anomalies started. EMF readings spiked in the hallway outside our door. Off the charts. On the night vision feed, orbs of light drifted through the corridor, slow and deliberate. They resolved into faces, gaunt, hollow-eyed, mouths moving in silent pleas. The audio picked up fragments. Fracture Team Alpha, status report. Subjects resisting, veil thinning. They're coming through. Ramirez was on watch with me. He stared at the screen, face pale. That's them. The ones from the basement. Then the feed glitched. Shadows swarmed the camera lenses. Dark shapes pressing against the glass like hands trying to push through. The orbs flared bright, and the audio screamed. A chorus of voices overlapping, deafening. Ramirez screamed too. He dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears. Make it stop! They're inside my skull! Kowalski burst in from the hallway. What the hell? The lights in the common room flickered, died, then surged back. Shadows poured across the floor like spilled ink, reaching for us. Hayes appeared in the doorway, sidearm drawn. Evacuate, now! We ran. Ramirez collapsed halfway down the hall, whispering frantically in Russian. We dragged him out into the snow, aurora blazing overhead like a wound in the sky. The voices followed us into the night. You can't close it. You're part of it now. The fracture endures. We got Ramirez to the aid station. The medics sedated him. Diagnosis: acute psychotic break. They flew him to Fairbanks the next morning. Kowalski and I stood outside the aid station watching the Black Hawk lift off into the dark. Hayes joined us, face grim. We're not done, he said. Whatever's in there isn't finished with us. I looked back at Block 47. The windows were dark, but I swear I saw movement behind the glass, elongated shapes watching us leave, and in my head, faint but clear, a single whisper. Chapter 6. The rift widens. With Ramirez gone, medevaced to Fairbanks under heavy sedation and a diagnosis of acute psychotic break, the base felt smaller, colder, more exposed. The whispers didn't stop when he left. If anything, they grew bolder. They followed us into the motor pool where engines stalled for no reason, into the chow hall where radios suddenly blared static laced with 1962 transmissions, and into the missile control center where consoles flashed phantom alerts. Bogies inbound, multiple contacts, veil breach imminent. Every time, radar showed clear skies. Every time, the screens reset themselves after a few terrifying seconds. Word spread fast. Soldiers started avoiding Block 47. Bunks went empty as guys requested transfers or pulled extra shifts anywhere else. And command locked the building down, yellow tape across every entrance, armed guards posted 24/7. But the entities didn't care about tape or sentries. They moved freely. Kowalski and I met Lieutenant Hayes in his office at 0200 the morning after Ramirez's evacuation. The aurora was raging outside the window, green and purple ribbons tearing across the sky like wounds that refused to heal. Hayes looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We can't ignore this anymore," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were more declassified fragments he'd pulled from restricted archives. Fracture wasn't just about mind control. They were running what they called resonance rituals, combining shamanic practices from local Alaskan indigenous groups with cutting-edge tech. Subsonic frequencies tuned to specific brainwave patterns, hallucinogens, and these resonance devices. He tapped a grainy photo of the copper-coiled helmet we'd seen in the basement. They believed they could fracture the veil between realities and pull intelligence directly from the other side. Remote viewing on steroids. But the entities they contacted weren't friendly observers, or they were hungry. He leaned forward. The program was terminated when the subjects started dying, or vanishing. The last entry says, "The rift stabilized but never fully closed. They sealed the basement and hoped it would stay dormant." "It didn't," Kowalski said quietly. Hayes nodded. "No. And now it's feeding on us." We had one option left. Try to close it. Hayes authorized a final operation, off the books. No official log, no after-action report. Just the three of us, plus Chaplain Morales, who Hayes had quietly briefed. Morales was a quiet man from Texas, former infantry before seminary, the kind who carried a Bible and a Beretta with equal conviction. He didn't laugh when we told him what we'd seen. He just said, "I've read the old field manuals. Some wars aren't fought with bullets." We prepared during the next storm, winds howling at 70 knots, visibility near zero. Perfect cover. We gathered what we could, industrial salt from the motor pool, old superstition but worth a shot. Holy water Morales blessed in a canteen, crucifixes, and a set of industrial flares. We also took the resonance helmet, carefully disconnected from its wires, and a portable generator to power the subsonic emitter we'd found in the basement. If they used tech to open the rift, maybe tech could help close it. At 23:30, we cut through the tape on Block 47's main entrance and descended once more into the basement. The air was thicker than before, heavy with that same ozone and decay smell. The hum was louder now, constant like a heartbeat. We reached the fracture chamber. The rift was no longer subtle. It hung in the center of the room, a vertical tear in reality about 6 feet tall, edges frayed and shimmering with sickly violet light. Shadows writhed around it like smoke. The temperature plunged. Our breath froze in midair. The entities emerged immediately, taller now, more solid, limbs stretching unnaturally. They didn't speak aloud. Their voices flooded our minds in unison. "You came back. Good. The fracture hungers. Join us." Hayes stepped forward, voice steady. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we command you to depart." The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing. Morales began reciting the rite of exorcism, Latin rolling off his tongue like a weapon. Kowalski and I moved to the platform. We set the helmet on the chair, connected it to the generator, and powered up the subsonic emitter. The low frequency thrummed through the room, opposite the tone they'd used in 62. We hoped it would disrupt the resonance. The rift pulsed violently. The entities lunged. Cold hands grabbed at us. Real pressure now, bruising. I felt claws dig into my shoulders. Kowalski fired her M9 into the nearest shadow. The round passed through, but the entity shrieked and pulled back. Hayes and Morales pressed forward, chanting louder. I tossed handfuls of salt into the rift. It flared, spitting sparks. A Kowalski ignited flares and hurled them into the tier, bright magnesium light exploding inside the void. The entities howled, a sound that rattled our teeth. I felt them in my head, offering visions, power, knowledge, the ability to never feel fear again. Forbidden things. I almost listened. "Resist!" Hayes barked. "Focus!" We pushed closer. Morales anointed the walls with holy water. The rift shrank, edges burning inward. The shadows thrashed, desperate. One grabbed Morales by the throat. He gasped, but kept chanting. With a final surge, we threw everything at it. Salt, fire, prayer, the subsonic pulse at maximum. The rift contracted to a pinpoint, screaming, a sound like tearing metal and dying stars. Then it snapped shut. Silence. The hum vanished. The cold lifted slightly. The shadows dissolved into nothing. We stood there, panting, covered in frost and sweat. The chamber was empty, just dust and old equipment. We climbed the stairs in silence. Outside, the storm had broken. Dawn was coming, pale and cold. But as we stepped into the snow, I heard it. One last whisper, faint, almost gentle. We'll return. The fracture endures. Chapter 7. Echoes unbroken. The rift closed, or at least it appeared to. We emerged from Block 47 into the pale grey light of an Alaskan dawn, frost clinging to our gear, breath still visible, even as the storm had finally broken. The aurora had faded, leaving the sky a bruised, empty blue. Lieutenant Hayes led the way back to the barracks, Chaplain Morales trailing behind with his Bible clutched tight. Kowalski and I brought up the rear, silent, scanning every shadow like we expected the entities to lunge out of the snowdrifts. We didn't speak much that morning. We filed a vague maintenance report about electrical anomalies resolved, then went our separate ways. Hayes ordered the basement sealed permanently, steel plates welded over the stairwell doors, the entire level declared structurally unsound. Within a week, engineers arrived with bulldozers. Block 47 was demolished in a single afternoon. Concrete dust rose into the freezing air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Official reason: aging infrastructure and safety concerns. No one asked questions. No one wanted to. I rotated stateside 3 months later. Fort Campbell, Kentucky, green hills, warm nights, the opposite of Alaska in every way. I told myself the distance would help. I told myself the whispers had stayed behind in the permafrost. They hadn't. The first night back in my apartment off-post, I woke at 2:30. Same time the scratching had always started. No wind, no generator hum, just silence. Then the voice, faint but unmistakable. "They fractured us, but you're still whole, for now." I sat up, heart hammering. The room was empty. No vents, no shadows moving. Just the soft glow of the streetlight through the blinds. I checked every corner, every closet. Nothing. I told myself it was a dream. Residual stress. But the voice returned the next night. And the next. Kowalski transferred to Fort Bragg shortly after. We stayed in touch through encrypted messages at first, short check-ins, coded references to the Northern Assignment. Then the messages grew shorter. One day she wrote, "Still hearing them, not loud, just there, like background noise that never turns off." After that, she went quiet. Last I heard, she'd requested a medical discharge. Adjustment disorder, the paperwork said. I knew better. Lieutenant Hayes made major and moved to the Pentagon. He never mentioned fracture again, but once, during a rare phone call, he said, "I keep the Polaroid on my desk, the one from the sealed room. Sometimes I catch myself staring at it, waiting for the faces to change." Ramirez never recovered fully. He spent 6 months in a VA psychiatric facility in Virginia. When they finally released him, he moved back to El Paso with his family. I visited him once. He looked 10 years older. His eyes darted constantly, as if tracking something only he could see. "They're still watching, Sarge," he told me over coffee. Not angry anymore, patient, waiting for the next fracture. He showed me his arms, covered in faint scratches he swore he didn't remember making. They formed the same broken circle symbol we'd seen carved into the vents and walls. Fort Greely still stands. The missile silos remain active. Radars sweep the northern skies for threats we can see. But Block 47 is gone, replaced by a flat, empty patch of gravel surrounded by chain link and warning signs. Soldiers stationed there now don't talk about it much. The old-timers do, though. In quiet moments at the NCO club or during long winter patrols, they lower their voices and mention the thing in the basement. Most laugh it off. Some don't. I still wake at 02:30 some nights. Not every night, but often enough. The voice is softer now, almost conversational. You close the door, Thorne. But doors can be opened again. I don't answer it. I just lie there in the dark, listening, waiting for it to fade. Sometimes I think about going back, not to Greeley, to the site where Block 47 once stood, digging through the gravel, looking for whatever's left of the resonance devices, the isolation chambers, the rift itself. Maybe I'd find nothing. Maybe I'd find proof. Or maybe I'd find them waiting. Because deep down, I know the truth. Operation Fracture didn't end in 1962. It didn't end when we sealed the basement. It didn't even end when the building came down. It's still running. Quietly, patiently, in the minds of everyone who ever set foot in that place. Including me. I carry the fracture now. We all do. And sometimes, late at night when the house is still and the world feels too quiet, I hear the scratching again. Not on wood, not in vents. Inside my skull. Soft, deliberate, waiting.